The words, "Jesus was evil," blazed across the cardboard, bringing Jonathan Roumie's inspirational speech to a sudden halt. The bold, knife-like writing tore through the already emotional atmosphere of the packed Indianapolis auditorium. The young woman held the sign high. Her eyes met Jonathan's unflinching. Amidst the enthusiastic fans, she was a red stain on a white background, a concentrated focus so thick you could feel it on your skin. And what happened next would leave her completely speechless and shatter everything she believed about faith, about pain, and about the man who had become Jesus. Jonathan didn't call security. He didn't turn around to continue his speech. He put the microphone down and started walking toward her. The room held its breath. No one knew if they were about to witness a violent confrontation or something else entirely. Jonathan's steps were slow, strangely calm, like a stream of water weaving through the stunned crowd at the Indianapolis Convention Center. The girl was Sarah Martinez. She clutched her sign as Jonathan, who had played Jesus in The Chosen, approached. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline pumping. She had driven 4 hours from Cincinnati just to ruin this event. To her, this was more than a protest. It was a deep-seated anger. Jonathan stopped in front of her. He spoke softly without a trace of anger. "Girl, can I talk to you for a moment?" Sarah could hardly believe her ears. There was no scolding, no arrogance, just warm brown eyes filled with genuine curiosity. That melted the defenses she'd built up over the weeks. The security team who had been moving in paused. They looked at their boss, unsure how to react. Sarah looked at the face she'd seen hundreds of times on TV. On her old sofa, where the family had gathered on Sunday nights before everything had come crashing down. "You can't change my mind," she said. Her voice still firm but lacking the edge she'd practiced in front of the mirror. "I'm not going to change anything," Jonathan replied. "I just want to hear you." Silence fell. Sarah took a deep breath. Just 3 months ago, she'd been attending church every week, sitting with her family in the same pew at St. Augustine's, where her grandmother had been married 60 years earlier. Her faith had been rock solid. She went to church summer camp and spent hours discussing the Bible with Father Miguel, and her younger sister Isabella was the light of the family. She was a sophomore at Indiana University, dreaming of becoming a social worker. Isabella was the one who brought food to the homeless every weekend, who made the family watch The Chosen together, and quoted God's word at every meal. "Sarah, have you seen the new episode?" My sister's face lit up every time she talked about God, about hope, about kindness. The past hung heavy in the air, hanging like an invisible weight. Jonathan recognized the feeling immediately. He had heard too many heartbreaking stories from fans grappling with loss, and he knew something profound had happened in this girl's life. He nodded slowly. There was no rush to fill the silence. From his experience as Jesus, he knew that. Sometimes, the most powerful healing came from moments of silence when you were simply present with someone's pain. "Would you like to sit down and talk for a moment?" He gestured toward a quiet corner of the lobby where light flickered through the auditorium doors. Just a few minutes. Sarah was taken aback. The invitation had thrown her off course. She had braced herself for an argument, for being escorted out by security, for an onslaught of zealous followers. But kindness from the man she had once seen as a symbol of falsehood? She was not prepared for that. Why do you want to talk to me? She asked, her initial challenge giving way to genuine confusion. I'm holding a sign that says Jesus is evil. Jonathan smiled slightly, a smile that reached his eyes. Because I have a hunch, there's a story behind that sign. And to me, every story has value. He paused, then added softly, Jesus spent most of his time talking to doubters. Why should I be any different? No dogma, no moralizing, just simple, genuine compassion. Flashback. That fateful evening, the night everything changed, had begun like any other in the Martinez household. Sarah's younger sister, Isabella, was driving home from her evening sociology class. She was eager to tell her sister about systemic poverty. The weather was nice, the roads were empty. She texted her mother, bought Sarah cookies from the college bakery, as was her custom for Thursday night, watching The Chosen. Sarah squeezed the sign in her hand. It dropped a little. The intensity in her eyes was beginning to crack under the weight of an unexpected kindness. You don't understand, she said, her voice cracking. I used to be like them. She nodded toward the audience, still watching intently. I used to believe that God was good, that prayer was powerful, that faith could move mountains. Jonathan asked, his voice light. And now? The question carried no judgment. It was just an invitation as light as a breath to let her pour out what was weighing on her heart. The audience was still watching, but for Jonathan, the girl in front of him was the only one present. He looked at her as if she were the only person in existence. I know now, Sarah said, her voice sour, her eyes red. I know now. Terrible things can happen to the best of people, and no amount of faith is enough to stop it. Her voice broke at the end of the sentence, a wave breaking in two, exposing a heart torn by loss. Jonathan felt his heart clench. He had read thousands of letters from people whose faith had been crushed by tragedy. People who had seen him as Jesus, as if searching for answers he could not give. I am truly sorry, he said softly. Whatever you have gone through, I share your sorrow. No formulaic consolation, no empty Bible quotation. Just one person standing next to another in a moment of truth and pain. Sarah bit her lip. And then, the words she had kept bottled up for months came out. My sister is gone. The voice was only a whisper, but it carried the weight of a broken soul. You were the best person I have ever known, the most faithful, the kindest. And yet, God let you go. The board in her hand shook as if it could no longer hold. There was a silence between them. But that silence became a fragile bridge across the endless abyss. Jonathan did not try to heal her with theory or doctrine. He just stood there fully present with that pain, allowing it to exist, not rushing to erase it. If you believe that choosing love over anger is an act of courage, comment courage below. Together, we are creating a space of truth and compassion. Next, unanswered questions and unexpected grace. What was she like? Jonathan asked after a pause. His voice was soft, as if inviting Sarah to open the door to her memories. For the first time since entering the hall, Sarah's eyes softened a little. Isabella is everything I wish I could be. She began, her voice growing more steady as she spoke of her sister. Every Saturday morning, I volunteer at the homeless shelter. I bring coffee to the elderly neighbors, and I can make anyone laugh even on their worst day. She smiled softly, a softness in her once angry eyes. I want to change the world. I believe social work is my path. Jonathan watched quietly. He noticed Sarah's posture change. Her shoulders were no longer tense, her eyes were no longer defensive. The anger had receded, replaced by love and pride. This was what he had been silently praying for. Not to win an argument, but to reach the deepest part of her heart, the place where she had known love, where she had known trust. She sounds like she has a beautiful heart, Jonathan said softly. I understand why you miss her so much. Sarah nodded. You do. Then her eyes darkened again. Her voice hardened as if frozen. That's why it makes it all the more pointless. The question she had kept in her heart for months now poured out like a waterfall. Why would a good God take someone like that? Why let me suffer? Your show had made her believe that following God made sense. But when I needed him most, where was he? Around them, people had left the auditorium, standing in a silent circle in the lobby. A few had their phones out recording, but most just stood there, staring at the rare sight before them. A few elderly women quietly wiped away tears, perhaps recognizing themselves in Sarah's confession. The security team stood still, not intervening, as if waiting for Jonathan's signal. He took a deep breath. I don't have an easy answer to that, Jonathan said sincerely. I've asked the same thing. His voice was unwavering, but filled with truth. Playing Jesus doesn't make me understand God's plan better, nor does it make me avoid the pain of life. He chuckled sadly. It just reminds me of how much I don't understand. Sarah paused. The answer was different from anything she had heard before. No excuses, no philosophizing, no preaching. Then why do you keep doing it? She asked. But this time it wasn't confrontational. Her voice was filled with genuine curiosity. Why keep playing someone you're not sure about? Jonathan mused. Because even in my doubts, in my confusion, I've always found moments of grace. Not some bright miracle, he smiled softly. Just little moments where love shows up in the dark. Sometimes through other people. Sometimes inexplicable. He looked straight at her, like tonight. The fact that you're here, that you dare to ask such difficult questions, is sometimes a form of grace. Sarah's eyes widened, unable to hide her confusion. My anger is grace, she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. I came here to disrupt your show, to go against everything you stand for. I want to hurt your message, because mine has been crushed. She was surprised by the sudden honesty. Maybe, Jonathan said softly, because your questions come from love. You're not angry because you don't care. You're angry because you cared deeply. He looked at her and said, his voice chillingly honest. Trouble in faith is not the opposite of faith. Sometimes it's the truest expression of faith. The silence was deafening. Although the crowd around them had grown larger, no one broke the silence. A few people silently wiped away tears, as if recalling a time when they themselves had questioned their faith. Several young people in Catholic youth group shirts stood nearby, eyes wide, silently witnessing a conversation about faith, unlike anything they had ever heard in church. Flashback. The accident happened on a Wednesday night in mid-December, just 2 weeks before Christmas. Isabella was driving home from her shift at the campus bookstore. She was singing along to some modern Christian songs as she always had, prayers that seemed to be forgotten. The drunk driver ran a red light and hit Isabella from the front. He walked away from the accident without a scratch. Isabella was not so lucky. She lay in the ICU for 6 days between life and death before quietly passing away. Sarah still remembered clearly her hand in hers was the last thing she had left. The worst thing, Sarah continued, her voice starting to steady as if she were drawing from the depths of her pain to say what she had never dared to say. For those 6 days, I kept praying. Even when I couldn't speak clearly, I kept asking God to help others. Pray for the man who caused the accident, for the doctors, for our whole family. The tears could no longer be held back. What kind of God ignores prayers like that? Jonathan felt his throat tighten. Though he had heard similar stories hundreds of times, each sentence felt like a new stab, never becoming familiar. He took a deep breath. I don't know, he said quietly. I really don't know why some prayers seem to go unanswered, while others happen in ways we never expect. But one thing I do know, that Isabella still prays for others even in the midst of her own pain. Says a lot about the person she is. Sarah looked at him through wet lashes. What do you mean? She asked, her hand still clutching the tablet, but her fingers were not as stiff as before. There was something in Jonathan's voice, not empty comfort, but genuine sympathy, that made her continue listening, exhausted as she was. The hall was silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting for an answer. I think Jonathan said softly that not everyone can continue to love through pain. The fact that she still reaches out, that she still thinks of others, that is a sign of a heart that has been transformed by love, to the point that even pain cannot extinguish it. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Maybe the answer to your question is not what God has or has not done for Isabella. It's what He has done through her. Sarah was silent. Her hand loosened on the protest sign. It almost slipped from her hand as she whispered, You mean prayers for others? But they didn't work. That man is still free. The doctors couldn't save you. My family is still broken. Her voice was tired, as if she had replayed the same thoughts in her head 1,000 times. Jonathan tilted his head, asking softly, What about the driver? What happened to him after the accident? Not legally, but mentally. The doctors. Your family. Did anything change after that week? The questions weren't meant to seek a clear conclusion, but to open up another perspective. A perspective that, in her blind grief, she had never been calm enough to see. Sarah frowned, trying to remember the details she had been avoiding for so long. The driver actually came to the funeral, she said slowly. He was sobbing. He collapsed. He could barely stand. He said that Isabella's forgiveness changed his life. He stopped drinking after that. And he started volunteering at the homeless shelter where Isabella used to work. She paused suddenly, realizing that she too was having trouble keeping her anger in check as she recounted it. Jonathan nodded slightly. What about the medical staff? He continued, his voice still soft as a breath, but firm. Sarah took a breath, confusion in her eyes. Dr. Patterson, who treated me in the ICU, he said that Isabella's attitude in her final days reminded him of why he started working as a doctor. Actually, she continued, her voice trailing off. He was about to quit because he was so exhausted. But instead, he started a new program at the hospital to provide spiritual support for families. She hesitated, then added, my parents also changed. Instead of letting the pain tear them apart, they grew closer together. Jonathan nodded, not with the triumphant air of someone who was right, but with the deep appreciation of someone who knows how to find light in the darkest corners of life. So maybe, he said softly, Isabella's prayers have been answered, not in the ways any of you would have wanted, but in ways that quietly created waves of healing and transformation that you couldn't see at first. The words were like a wave, sudden and profound, that made Sarah stumble a little. She had to step back a little to regain her balance. At that moment, Jonathan instinctively, pain turns to hope. Jonathan gently reached out to catch Sarah as she stumbled, touching her like a brother. The gesture was gentle, but it did not erase the cruel reality. Isabella was still gone, but she still died. Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. No matter how many people were helped, she still didn't make it. How is that fair? How can that be love? The questions weren't so urgent anymore. They came from a deeper place, a genuine desire to understand. It's not fair. Jonathan agreed, his voice so simple, so honest, that it surprised Sarah. There's nothing fair about losing someone you love, especially someone as wonderful as Isabella. And anyone who tells you that it's God's plan or everything happens for a reason, they're trying to comfort themselves, not share the truth with you. His words weren't meant to soothe. They were meant to validate her pain. No denial, no correction, just quiet empathy. Sarah found herself suddenly recalling memories she'd forgotten in her anger. Isabella reading the Bible during family time. The smiles that spread every Thursday night when they watched The Chosen together. The times she quoted Jesus from the show even while doing chores. She loves that show, Sarah said quietly, her eyes meeting Jonathan's. She said, when she saw you play Jesus, she felt closer to him. Jonathan smiled slightly. So maybe this conversation is part of Isabella's influence. Maybe he's still praying for you. Hopefully you'll find your way back to the love that held your family together. He gestured gently to the board in her hand. Not the easy faith that expects quick answers, but a deeper kind of faith that can hold both love and questions, both hope and grief. Sarah had been attending monthly therapy sessions to address her loss. She was encouraged to express her anger about Isabella's death. It was during one of those sessions that the idea of confronting a religious figure like Jonathan came to her. Although her therapist had warned her of the risk of open confrontation, Sarah had been preparing quietly. She had practiced in the mirror every night. I made this board yesterday, she confessed, looking down. I've been planning it for weeks, preparing every argument I could think of to argue with you about faith and the goodness of God. I didn't expect You to just listen. No convincing, no defending. She looked at him, her eyes slightly red. Why don't you defend your faith? Isn't that what religious people do? Jonathan smiled softly, gently. That may be true. But maybe defending your faith and sharing love are two different things. Jesus spent most of his time with doubters. He didn't focus on winning arguments, he chose to walk with them through their doubts. He paused. If I really wanted to be like him, shouldn't I do the same? The air became as quiet as a cathedral. The people around the hall stared at them. There were soft sobs. Even the teenagers in youth shirts seemed awakened to something they had never seen before. A listening faith. Sarah let out a small laugh, surprising herself. Isabella would love this conversation, she said. She always said, honest questions were more valuable than easy answers. I used to get annoyed with people in church who thought having faith meant never doubting. A small smile crossed her face for the first time since she'd walked in. She would laugh if she knew I brought a protest sign to a Christian event. Jonathan smiled at her, his eyes shining. She was wise even when she was young, he said, and maybe that wisdom is still there. That brought her here tonight, not to destroy anything, but to find a way through the pain in a way that honors both love and memory. Sarah looked back at the board, truly seeing it for the first time. Jesus is evil. She read her own words aloud. Then she shook her head. I can't believe I wrote this. I was so angry. I wanted to blame someone, but I know Isabella wouldn't want me to blame God for her death. She would want me to find hope. Jonathan tilted his head. If so, what would she want me to do with this pain? Not what I think you should do. Not what your family would want you to do, but what Isabella, the one who knew you best, would want you to do with the love you had left in your heart. Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. But this time, they were tears of memory and love, not anger. She would have wanted you to continue helping others, Sarah said softly. Before she died, we were planning to volunteer at a homeless shelter together. She asked me many times, but I was busy with nursing school and kept putting it off. Jonathan asked softly as a suggestion, so now, is there anything stopping you? Do it in her memory, to continue the love you shared. The entire hall leaned toward them, not in the hope of a miracle, but because she was witnessing something more sacred, a heart opening again. Sarah choked, searching for words. I was so focused on the anger that I forgot there were other ways to honor her. I thought, if I stopped being angry, it would mean I was betraying her, that I forgot how important she was. Jonathan nodded slightly. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the best way to honor someone who lived for love is to continue living that way, not to prove anything, not to be worthy of anyone. Just because that's what Isabella has always wanted. And that's what she planted in you. Sarah looked around the hall again. Faces young, old many were crying. Some smiled softly and hopefully. These people really love your movie, huh? She asked, looking out at the audience. Isabella would go crazy if she knew I met you. She always says, watching The Chosen made her feel like she knew Jesus personally, like he was real, like he truly understood the struggles of ordinary people. He was, Jonathan replied simply. And maybe he still is. Maybe that's what I'm learning from you tonight. That faith isn't about having all the answers or never asking hard questions. Maybe it's about choosing love even when life doesn't make sense. About carrying forward Isabella's legacy by the way you love others who are struggling. For the first time since Isabella's passing, something shifted in Sarah's chest. Not complete healing, but the first flicker of possibility. I don't know if I can believe in God like I used to, she admitted. But maybe I can believe in the love Isabella showed, in the hope she had even at the end. Maybe. That's enough for now. Jonathan nodded gently. Maybe that's exactly where faith is supposed to begin. Not with certainty, but with choosing to love like someone loved you. Isabella sounds like she taught that kind of faith. He looked down at the sign in her hands. What do you think she'd want you to do with that sign? Sarah glanced at the cardboard, then back at Jonathan. Around them, the audience held its breath. She'd probably want me to throw it away, Sarah said at last. Not because the questions don't matter, but because holding on to anger isn't the same as holding on to love. Without ceremony, she walked to the trash can and dropped the sign inside. The sound echoed faintly in the quiet room. When she turned back, she looked lighter, not healed, but less burdened. What now? She asked. Vulnerable. Hopeful. As I came here planning to disrupt everything you stood for, she continued. And now? I feel like Isabella somehow orchestrated this whole thing. I don't know what to do with that. Maybe, Jonathan said warmly, you could start by being grateful for it, and then trust that this feeling that love can reach across impossible distances might be exactly what Isabella wanted you to rediscover. Not as an answer to everything, but as a way to start rebuilding hope. People in the audience quietly stepped forward, not to crowd her, but to gently surround her. One elderly woman placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder. I lost my daughter too, she said softly. Different story, same ache. You're not alone. Others joined, each sharing small pieces of their own losses. A spouse, a child, a friend. They weren't there to fix Sarah's grief, just to show her she didn't have to carry it alone. Isabella always said that shared pain becomes lighter, Sarah whispered. She was right, wasn't she? Jonathan nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He walked to the trash can, picked up her discarded sign, and held it up. Gasps rippled through the room as everyone saw the bold words, Jesus was evil. This sign, Jonathan said, holds some of the most honest questions a person can ask. It came from pain, real loss, real love. He turned to Sarah. Would you help me transform this into something that honors Isabella instead? What do you mean? She asked quietly. He pulled a pen from his pocket and handed it to her. Cross out evil and write something Isabella would want the world to know about Jesus. Not because you believe it perfectly, but because it honors the love that shaped you. Sarah's hands trembled as she took the pen. The lobby was silent. She drew a thick line through evil, and beneath it wrote a single word, unlove. The message now read, Jesus was love. Tears streamed down her cheeks. This is what she'd want, she whispered. Even in her pain, she chose love. she'd want me to choose it too. Jonathan's eyes were wet. She's still teaching, still guiding you. That kind of love outlives death. Soft applause spread through the room, not for drama, but for transformation. Sarah looked at the faces around her, strangers who had witnessed her journey from rage to renewal. I don't understand everything about God, she said, but I understand love. Isabella taught me that. And maybe that's where I start rebuilding. Jonathan smiled. That's where Jesus started too. Isabella understood that better than most. He paused. How do you think she'd want you to share that love now? Sarah didn't hesitate. The homeless shelter. She wanted me to volunteer with her there. I'll start next weekend. Maybe I can help others who feel like I did. Jonathan nodded, deeply moved. She would be so proud. This what happened tonight is exactly why she loved The Chosen. Because it showed faith in action, not just beliefs. As the lobby began to settle, people surrounded Sarah with support. The woman who first approached her, Margaret, invited her to a Tuesday night grief group. Jonathan watched the connections form and knew something sacred had unfolded far beyond anything he had planned. Thank you, Sarah said as the crowd dispersed. I came here ready to challenge everything. Instead, you helped me remember who I was before the anger. Isabella would thank you too. The gift was yours, Jonathan replied. Your honesty, your courage, your questions, that's real faith. That's what Isabella was showing you. He gestured to the transformed sign. That's going to help more people than you realize. Sarah nodded. I think I'll frame it. Hang it in my apartment. A reminder that love is always a choice, even when nothing else makes sense. As Jonathan turned to return to the auditorium, Sarah called after him. Do you really think she can see all this? That she knows her prayers for me are still working? Jonathan paused. I don't know how it works, he said softly. But I believe love like hers doesn't disappear. It keeps shaping us, creating grace in the most unlikely places. Maybe that's all we need to know about eternity. Real love never stops transforming lives. 6 months later. Sarah was leading her own grief support group at the homeless shelter Isabella once served. On the wall behind her hung the sign, Jesus was love. The group had grown welcoming people with heavy questions and broken hearts. What began in anger had become a ministry of grace. Even the drunk driver who caused the crash had joined the shelter's volunteer team. His life transformed by the forgiveness Isabella offered from her hospital bed. The story of that evening spread far and wide, not as a dramatic conversion, but as something deeper proof that when people feel safe enough to bring their questions into community, love can do the rest. Jonathan often shared the story at events, always reminding audiences that Sarah's honesty had opened the door to real healing, not just for herself, but for countless others. Isabella's legacy rippled outward through every act of love, every question voiced, every heart softened by grace. Sarah never went back to the black and white faith she once had, but she found something stronger, a trust that love is more powerful than certainty, and that it shows up again and again in our darkest moments. And maybe that's the real miracle. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing for more moments of faith and hope. And let us know in the comments. Has someone's unexpected kindness ever changed your perspective? Your story might help someone else choose love today.